So, typically a story approximately when I was 18, a long time ancient, and had an individual experience with a man who caused a lockdown at my school. It all begun amid the 4th hour of the school day. I was sitting in lesson, scarcely alert, when abruptly a commotion came over the intercom. The foremost said, "Consideration understudies and staff, typically a code ruddy lockdown. Please follow lockdown strategies instantly." My heart sank, since I would expect everyone else is dead when hearing this. Our instructor at that point began telling us where to go. We all had to group up within the corner of the room. She at that point closed and bolted the classroom entryways and turned out the lights. At this point, everyone began whispering, pondering what exactly was going on. Clearly, we all needed to know why we were under a lockdown. One of the kids within the course inquired the instructor, but she wouldn't tell us. She, as it were, told us to remain calm. The minutes turned into hours, which was horrendous, since locking a bunch of high school kids in a room without being able to move isn't such a great thought. Numerous understudies went on their phones, and others whispered and talked to each other. The classroom got to be a tremendous blend of disarray and uneasiness. But as the hours dragged on, we sat there, and each commotion we listened, or thought we listened exterior of the room frightened us, but we didn't listen much. At this point, we were all convinced that there truly was some person out there with a weapon. A few understudies guessed almost a potential interloper or an active threat, whereas others whispered approximately rumors they had heard. At one point, one of the kids in the lesson got up and couldn't resist looking out the classroom window. The educator made him sit back down, pretty much right absent, but he claimed he saw a guy in a ruddy sweatshirt strolling down the hallway. I wasn't beyond any doubt whether to accept him or not. Hours of holding up went by, and before long we reached just approximately the end of the school day. Then at last, the long-awaited declaration came over the intercom. The lockdown has been lifted. If it's not too much trouble, stay calm and continue with caution. Everyone was so upbeat to be able to leave, and the classroom entryway swung open. We all cautiously stepped back into the hallways. The story didn't conclusion there for me. Back at that point, I rode the transport to and from school, and I boarded it at the side the other kids. As I rode the transport home, the occasions of the day replayed in my intellect. The full day fare felt abnormal and off, and it made me more mindful of the things around me for the rest of the day. When I got off the transport, I taken note that a ways back, a car was stopping on the side of the road exterior of my house. I only lived with my guardians, who were both at work at the time. The car wasn't like right before my house, but a small ways down. We too lived in a small, more rustic region, so the yards were greater, and there was a small more space. This too implied that we got less activity through the neighbourhood in spite of the fact that, after getting off the transport, I rapidly strolled interior, trusting that the car would fare drive absent. When I got interior my house, in spite of the fact that I checked out the window and the car was still there, I seemed to see that some person was interior of it, and it fair gave me an awful feeling. I didn't need to require any chances. I called my guardians casually, inquiring when they would be domestic, covering up the uneasiness in my voice. They said that they would be a handful of hours, which did not offer assistance my circumstance. I did not tell them almost the car on the side of the road, since I didn't need them to stress, and I hoped that the car would drive absent before long. Alone within the house, I covered up by the window, peeking through the shades. The car outside wouldn't take off, and it cracked me out. Attempting to divert myself, I turned on the TV and put on a sitcom, but my eyes kept shooting back to the unpleasant car exterior. It fair wouldn't take off. I'd chosen that I wasn't attending to see exterior any longer. It wasn't doing me any great. Perhaps 10 minutes passed, and I was fair observing the TV. But at that point, I listened to entryway closing exterior. It was a car entryway. I rapidly looked back out the window once more, and this time saw a man getting out of the vehicle. He was wearing a ruddy sweatshirt. I observed him begin to walk up right into our front yard. I ducked down and after that ran absent, sprinting for my room. I got interior, closed my entryway, and stowed away beneath my bed like a small kid. I was panicked. My heart was dashing, and I didn't know what to do. Some minutes went by, and after that I listened another sound. It was a thumping at my room window. I almost about perhaps bounced up instantly. I took out my phone and dialed 911. Whoever was there was certainly up to no good. I told the administrator precisely what was going on, and I was told that the police would be there in no time. Meanwhile, I wasn't hearing any noises, and the man had thumped on my window fair the one time. I was still frightened as maybe though. Many more minutes passed, and I remained covered up beneath my bed. I had trusted that the man had gone absent, but fair as I was considering that, which would have been a plausibility, there was a sound of glass breaking coming from the other conclusion of the house, within the back. The fellow had broken in. I heard some more commotion from that direction, and soon it sounded like someone was interior. At that point, I listened another clamour. It was police sirens. This was the finest sound that I'd listened all day. I heard the man interior the house turning around and taking off through the back, the way that he had come. And a minute later, the police were there. Long story short, they really caught the fellow running absent within the neighbour's terrace. The same man was too, in fact, the cause of the lockdown at my school prior. Clearly, he had some way or another gotten inside the school. Likely some time recently it begun for the day. Some person spotted him interior, and the school went beneath a lockdown. I do not know how, but he was able to evade everyone, and at that point take off the school without getting caught, likely getting away out of an open window. Still can't accept how he went to my house of all places a short time later. It makes me think that conceivably the fellow was stalking me. Either way, I'm happy I do not need to stress approximately it any longer. This happened back in my first recruit year of Tall School. It was a normal school day, rather like any other for the foremost portion. I keep in mind I was sitting in my history course, which I think was the third period of the day. That's when someone came to the entryway of the classroom with a note. I remember back at my Tall School, 1 or 2 of understudies would work for the office each hour and convey passes to the understudies. The passes would usually be for the understudies to take off school for things like dental practitioner arrangements or anything. When the understudy ought to craftsmanship lesson, she given the note to my educator, Mr. Watterson. He produced the note and after that called my name. I was truly shocked, since I wasn't mindful of having any reason to take off the school that day. I thought perhaps I overlooked around a dental practitioner arrangement or something, but my mother hadn't specified anything, and I know she would have. When my title was called, I looked around, and after that got up and gradually strolled to my instructor. He said something like, "See you afterward, buddy. Here's the homework." At that point, he snatched the task from his work area and given it to me. I took the note, which moreover served as a corridor pass, and cleared out the classroom. I keep in mind that's when I examined the pass for the primary time. The note said something like, "I will be here to choose you up for your appointment at 10:30. Mother, I figure I had an arrangement of a few sort at fair, appeared a small bit bizarre to me still. I figure I was cheerful to be clearing out school. I strolled through the purge passages, making my way to the side entrance. There was a stopping part there, which is where individuals would get picked up by their guardians. I ought to the entryways and went exterior into the stopping part there. I saw a minivan, but it wasn't my mother's van, it was a diverse demonstrate and colour. I figured it was someone else's parent, and my mother wasn't there. However, the time was not very 10:30, but I think it was like 10:28 or something. I do not keep in mind precisely. I stood there looking around waiting for my mother to induce there, and after that I saw the minivan that was sitting there with the motor running, and the front passenger's window started to roll down. I looked and saw a lady turn her head over, and see at me. We made eye contact, and I might tell that she was getting to say something at that point. She did. The lady said that she was there to choose me up, and my mother had inquired her to she at that point, said that she was a friend of my mother. I had never seen this lady sometime recently in my life, in spite of the fact that I may not have been the brightest kid within the world, but I beyond any doubt wasn't that imbecilic. I was amazingly doubtful. I inquired the lady how she knew my mother exactly, and the lady answered saying something like, "We're fair old friends." I at that point told the lady that I didn't feel comfortable going with her, and I was going absent for my mother. The lady attempted to induce me to go within the van. I at that point turned around to head back into the school. This circumstance was beginning to feel truly crude. The issue was when I got back to the side entryways of the school, they wouldn't open. The entryways were bolted. I had overlooked that all entryways to the school were bolted amid the school day other than the front primary entrance. At that point things got more regrettable. I looked back to the van to see a side sliding entryway begin to open up. I wasn't mindful that anyone else had been interior of it. A man risen and begun strolling towards me. The van was perhaps 50 feet absent at this point, as I stood right exterior of the side entryways to the school. I felt like my as it were choice was to run absent. I turned and ran around to the front side of the school. I didn't bother to see back at all to see in the event that I would be chased. Back at that point, I might run beautiful quick. Unfortunately, I made it around to the front conclusion of the school beautiful rapidly. I kept running until I got to the front doors, and at that point, I strolled interior. When you to begin with got interior the front entryways at the school, there was a small window where a lady sat amid the school day. She would inquire you who you were, and you had to appear her your understudy ID or anything. She inquired me for my ID, and as I got it out, I attempted to tell her around what had fair happened. I must not have clarified it exceptionally well, in spite of the fact that, since she appeared lovely confounded, and to be legitimate, the full circumstance was beautiful confounding. I got a lobby pass from my mother to take off school for an arrangement that I didn't know what it was. At that point my mother wasn't there, but another lady was and inquired me to go with her. At that point a developed man popped out of the side of the van. Except me, I was fair as befuddled as she was. After affirming my school ID, the lady at the window composed me a pass to go back to my history course, and I was on my way. I strolled through the purge corridors of the school back to course. This was around 15 minutes after I had originally cleared out. I walked back in. My instructor was talking, and there was a video that was delayed on the board. I keep in mind it was super cumbersome strolling into the center of lesson. Everyone was gazing at me. They, as well as the instructor, were likely all truly confounded seeing me return before long after I had cleared out. Back so before long. Mr. Watterson said. I fair said, definitely there was perplexity, and I didn't got to leave. I at that point sat back down at my work area, and the lesson proceeded. Lesson only went on for around another 10 minutes after that, and after that we were let out. My following period was English. This lesson was continuously beautiful, boring to me for a few reasons, but it was also fairly easy. I had Miss Gallo as my teacher, who was exceptionally decent. I have to be coarse. and the day begun like all other. But amid this lesson, likely 20 minutes in, Miss Gallo got a phone call at her work area. She delayed the lesson and replied it. When she hung up the phone, she told us that we were going into a lockdown, and she made it clear that this was not a penetrate. She appeared reasonably concerned, and we all had to take off our work areas and sit on the ground within the back of the classroom. We had no thought what it was almost, and I genuinely had no clue either. I wasn't able to put through the specs for a few reasons. The lockdown went on for a good 30 minutes. Everyone was truly calm, and most individuals didn't say anything. Inevitably, there was another phone call. Miss Gallo went over and answered it and returned to advise us that the lockdown had been lifted. We were all calmed, and we wrapped up lesson, which didn't final as well much longer. There was still another hour of school cleared out at that point. By the time the school day was over, in spite of the fact that the word had spread, and I had found out what the lockdown was for, a man had strolled into the school and totally outperformed the ladies at the window inquiring for qualifications. She inquired him to halt, but he fair blew past her without saying a word and strolled into the school. He at that point vanished into the passages, and she had to call the office who made the decision to bolt down the school until the person was found and distinguished. Shockingly, he stowed away. It took about 30 minutes to discover him, and the police had to be called. They found him covering up within the bathrooms that were right by my locker. And the craziest portion was that it was the same man who would come out of the minivan that had attempted to choose me up. This story remains one of the craziest things to ever happen to me. The lady and the man must have somehow created the no for me and attempted to urge me to take off the school. Who they were and how they found me, I really have no thought. It truly monstrosities me out to think about that part. Fortunately, nothing like that happened again. This happened when I was 15, a long time ancient, and a sophomore in Toll School. I was hanging out with one or two of companions sometime recently school begun. We were fair standing around, talking almost idiotic stuff that 15-year-olds do. Before long, the caution chime rang, and we had to go our isolated ways to go to our classes. I took my time heading to my lesson since my educator, Coach Thompson, was beautiful laid back and didn't intellect in case I was a bit late. He as a rule begun course a number of minutes late besides, since he was moreover a sports coach and was continuously active with that stuff. As I made my way to course, the school chime rang once more. School was presently beginning, and I would be late, but I didn't think much of it and kept strolling. The corridors were presently purged. The intercom came back on, and there was a declaration that the school was going beneath a lockdown. I couldn't get it why. I was beautiful confused. Everything appeared fine to me. I kept strolling towards my classroom, considering it can be a wrong alert or a penetrate. When I entered the corridor where my classroom was found, I ceased and solidified. At the distant conclusion of the corridor, there was a huge man wearing a ski veil and all dark. He too had combat boots on and a gigantic dark duffel pack around his beer. It took me many seconds to process what was happening. The man within the ski veil hadn't taken note of me, however, but at that point he turned his head and looked in my course. I rapidly ducked back around the corner, frightened out of my intellect. He had been standing right where my classroom was, so I couldn't go there presently. The passages were totally purged, and I'd begun to freeze. I knew the school lovely well, as I'd been there bounty of times earlier to my sophomore year, so I went to the closest put I knew, which was an adjacent washroom. I was trusting to remain secure in there until everything was over. I sat in a washroom slowed down, attempting to tune in for any sounds, praying that the man wouldn't come interior. amid the time in there, I was panicked, and I didn't set out make a clamour. I remained within the washroom, attempting to calm myself down from hyperventilating for perhaps around 30 minutes. I was in there, it was totally calm, and I couldn't hear much. But at one point, I did listen strides, and it truly cracked me out. I truly do not know who it was, but luckily they moved past where I was, and after that things went back to being quiet. I fair trusted whoever that fellow I had seen would not enter the lavatory. At long last, I chosen that I would leave. I hadn't listened anything in the longest time. I thought it could be more secure to induce out of there, and I ventured out. When I did, I taken note the corridors were still purged and calm. The lockdown was still in impact, and I had no thought what was happening. I cautiously begun speed strolling back towards my classroom, and I was very careful, looking all around. I had made it almost midway back, when I all of a sudden listened a commotion that made me solidify. It was the sound of strides getting closer from the next corridor around the corner. It was happening all over once more. I might feel a sinking feeling of fear and stun once more. I rapidly turned around and went back down another corridor, attempting to dodge whoever was coming my way. I looked back for a part moment and saw the man within the ski veil beginning to come around the corner. At this point in time, I swear I might have run a 4.3 level within the 40-yard sprint. For once in my life, I was really running for my life, and nothing else mattered other than that. It was a weird feeling. I didn't care approximately anything, not young ladies I had smashes on, not my homework, not indeed my work. All I cared around was remaining lively for myself. I kept on running. Inevitably, I halted, incapable to listen the man behind me any longer. I assembled myself and begun strolling towards the exit, trusting to discover a way out. When I come to the exit, alleviation overwhelmed over me as I saw numerous police officers exterior of the school. I ran for the entryway, and when they saw me, they waved me over. I was able to leave and breathe a sigh of help. The man interior of the school was afterward caught, but we never found out what his eagerly were. The memory of that day frequented me, and my guardians finished up putting me in therapy to assist me out. No 15-year-old or anyone ought to have to encounter anything like that. It's been approximately 7 years presently, and I'm way better. We returned to our normal schedules at school in no time after, and our school had a 24-hour cop for the another year that made everybody feel a parcel more secure. Upbeat, no one got harmed, and I was able to make it out lively. I wouldn't wish that experience upon my worst adversary. Alright, so picture this. I'm called in as a substitute educator for a lesson that missed out on a field trip. The regular teacher and most of the understudies were out on the field trip, whereas I was cleared out in charge of 4 students who didn't have their parent consent slip marked. To set the scene, I just wrapped up subbing for another class. Afterwards, I was inquired to sub for this lesson, and the enlightening were lovely straightforward. Play a Mythbusters video for the students and hand out worksheets to keep them possessed. Sounds simple, right? Well, here's where things took an unforeseen turn. Scarcely a few minutes into course with the video playing, the Fab Four, who appeared to be indistinguishable buddies, all raised their hands and asked to go to the washroom. Presently, being the laid-back sub that I am, I allowed their wish with an inviting update to return before long, so we might wrap up the video together. They gestured energetically, promising to be back in a jiffy, and headed out to the corridor as I delayed the video. As I held up for them to return, a few of minutes went by. At that point, I listened a clamour come over the intercom. There was a declaration that the school was presently going into lockdown, and this was not a drill. This put me in a small bit of an odd circumstance. Panic started to settle in as I realised that these 4 kids were no place to be seen. Ought to I go out and rummage around for them? Or ought to I adhere to the lockdown protocols and secure the classroom by locking the doors and turning off the lights? Figured my understudies ought to be back any moment, and I stood there in my classroom doorway for approximately another miniature or so. In a minute of concern for their well-being, I chose to go find them. I figured they must be hanging out in the closest lavatory, right simple to find, or so I thought. I barely made my way to the hallway, fueled by a blend of stress and assurance. I strolled to the lavatory as rapidly as I might, and I got winded since I'm seriously not in shape like I used to be. I pushed open the lavatory entryway and thumped. I was trusting to discover them and usher them back to the classroom. "Hello folks, we're on lockdown. You wish to come back to the classroom?" I called out, my voice reverberating through the purge washroom. But to my shock, there was no reaction, not a peep. As confusion developed, I cautiously pushed the lavatory entryway open more extensive, half anticipating them to jump out, but that wasn't the case. The lavatory was purge, not a single individual in locate. My heart sank. Where on soil did these students go? I couldn't stay on it for long though, since my need was to urge back to my classroom. In case the students had wandered off, at that point that was their blame. They would likely be found by another workforce part. With a blend of uneasiness and scurry, I followed my steps, making my way back to the classroom that I was in charge of. I went interior and remained by the entryway. 10 long minutes went by, which felt like an entirety hour, and still there was no sign of my understudies. Just when I was approximately to lose my cool from all the anticipation, I listened this abnormal clamour coming from interior of the classroom. I rapidly filtered the room, trusting to figure out where it was coming from, but there was nothing there, fair an empty and super quiet classroom. I attempted to tell myself it was fair my intellect playing traps on me, but at that point I heard it again. This time my eyes bolted onto this individual hunched behind a work area at the back of the room. I cautiously drawn closer, my voice trembling when I inquired, "Who's there?" I was imploring it was just an understudy playing an elaborate trick, but to my dishearten, the figure that rose up from past the work area was no understudy. It was a man, a total stranger, and certainly not a student. I freaked out and sprinted out of the classroom promptly, frantic to find help. Presently, as a developed grown-up, you're likely pondering why I catapulted and didn't remain within the room and battle him. Like I said, I'm not as youthful as I utilized to be, and I'm not in shape, so the chances of me winning a battle securing myself are like 4 out of 10. I numbered on the entryway of the closest classroom, and gratefully the instructor opened the entryway. Their expression rapidly turned to concern as they tuned in to my clarification of what had happened. Without squandering a moment, they dialed the school foremost and cautioned her approximately the unused circumstance. Before long sufficient, the school got to be filled with action as police officers were all over within the passages. It turned out that the stranger I had experienced was the exceptionally individual the school had been bolted down for. He must have snuck into my classroom when I was down the lobby searching for my understudies. This realization made my intellect go dark as I considered all the conceivable outcomes that may have happened on the off chance that I didn't run absent from my classroom. It turned out that the lost understudies had taken asylum in another teacher's classroom. No one had thought to illuminate me, in spite of the fact that rumours started to circulate that this gatecrasher had ulterior thought processes, with whispers of him looking for somebody particular or conceivably carrying a weapon. The subtle elements remained dubious, and the school kept the data firmly beneath wraps. Looking back on that day, I'm fair thankful that everyone was firm after that insane occurrence. I required a few genuine time off. When I at last went back to educating, I had an entirety unused viewpoint. Certainly never disregard that day.